What is going on, everybody? Hello, hello, hello. I'm looking at the chat right now. The annoying ape. What's going on? Refresh this really quick. Cool. Bring that up. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dungeoneers Pack Live. My name is Josh. Thank you guys for tuning in. Dungeoneers Pack Live is a weekly live stream where I and guests discuss topics for D&D 5th edition to provide solutions to problems you have at your table. This week, I'm joined by Jordan from Flute Salute and Chris from UndrLVLd, because we're going to be talking about the new campaign book that's coming out for Critical Role, called the Netherdeep, and how you can draw information, draw inspiration, and draw on the themes of the Exandria setting from Critical Role to help you make your next Netherdeep character. What's going on, guys? How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Excited for this
Doing
topic.
good.
It's one I had to cram for. It's one I'm trying to expand my knowledge on, so I'm excited to brainstorm together.
All right. So big thing is, obviously, people are going to ask for critters. So starting with you, Jordan, how deep are you into Critical Role?
I started with Critical Role when I was working a desk job, and I saw that there was a stream of voice actors playing D&D. I thought that was interesting, and it was pretty rough at first compared to their production value now, but it wasn't horrible, and it was entertaining. And I was kind of in and out, like I'd watch their stuff once in a while. And I really got hooked on the Briarwood arc.
Yeah.
And then I kind of fell off and kind of came back when the campaign ended. And part of me thinks I need to go back and watch campaign 1 for all of the stuff between the Briarwoods and the ending, basically, which is quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then campaign 2, I was very invested at first, but I kind of lost interest. Maybe I had other stuff I was doing with my time. And then I got into it later after a certain character death because that sounded interesting to me, that there was more peril. And I watched most of campaign 2 after that. And then campaign 3, I've been watching it very devotedly. I've even made my first Critical Role like fan theory about Imogen, and that video it's my biggest video now on my channel, even though I'm not like a critter channel specifically. I'm just like general D&D. So I've really been trying to get into the lore ever since they put out that like Exandria, the history of, right before campaign 3 started, to just kind of give an overview of what the heck goes on with the history of Exandria and what it is. And that really helped me because the lore has always escaped me. It's hard for me to pay attention to some of the finer details in streams. But yeah, hopefully that gives some idea of what kind of a Critical Role fan I am.
Yep. I have had a similar origin. And Chris, how big of a critter are you?
Wouldn't call myself a critter, but I like Critical Role a lot. It's actually what got me into the game. I was still on the fence when campaign 1 ended. That's when I started watching it, so I kind of marathoned through it, and I was like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and give this game a shot. Maybe there's something to it. But yeah, Critical. Campaign 1 I loved. One of my favorite arcs was actually like their intro, like the end when they're in Craghammer, and they ended up fighting the beholder thing, and I loved that. That's what got me hooked. Kind of fell off with campaign 2. It's funny that you picked up with campaign 2 after a certain character's death, and for me that was kind of when I was like, eh. But Exandria Unlimited was awesome. I'm happy they're doing a season 2 of that, and campaign 3 I'm watching very closely. I really like the character in Laudna.
Yeah. And then as it for me, campaign 1, I started watching it when they just started because I was big into Geek and Sundry at the time, and just was watching all their other content. And then they started doing a D&D show. I was already playing 5th edition at the time, and I got hooked because I'm like, oh, D&D can just be more than a combat game. You can actually do more stuff. So Critical Role actually influenced how I started to come at the game, and how I started to actually start building my characters, and how it influenced my role play. That it can just be more than just a combat simulator where we're looking for that optimized path to victory at all turns. And campaign 2, I started to watch a little bit, and then I just fell off. It started to become too much of a time investment, right? Critical Role is a 4-hour show every Thursday, and it became a lot. And then I started, I believe, towards middle to the end of their campaign, I started my own channel. So it was one of those things where I don't have time to dedicate to watching that anymore. And the plot there is kind of sorry for fans of the show, came a little bit of a sleeper for me. It was just like, okay, cool. One of the main characters dies, and then what's the fallout after that? Cool. And then it just seems like they kept harping on a specific plot point every time. And then with COVID happening, well, I stopped watching and listening to a lot of my usual D&D content. And then Exandria Limited came in. I actually really enjoyed it. It was a nice change of pace, and it felt very much like Campaign 1, where these group of upstart adventurers that all kind of play on these classic tropes came together. And I think it helped out because they had a bunch of newer players in there that have never played before. So you get a lot of that. And then Campaign 3, I've struggled to keep up. It's a lot. Like, it's 4 hours, man. Like, I don't know if I can dedicate 4 hours every Thursday, except for that free Thursday at the end of the month that you can use to catch up. But it's a lot. All right.
I find that one way I've been able to keep up better lately is and I've never really been one to watch the live stream. I'm like next Monday watch on YouTube kind of guy while I'm working, or listen to it at least. And I realized I can speed it up like 1.5 times and turn that like 3-4 hours of content into a little bit less, and that
Yeah.
helps a lot.
Yeah, that's been my go-to tool this week for a lot of content I've been trying to catch up and watch. So I might have to do that, but I'm already like 10, 12 episodes behind. That's gonna be a long
That's
work week.
It's a lot of D&D to watch right there.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So to kick off with our first question, for those not familiar with Critical Role, or and it's very rare if you haven't heard somebody have heard of Critical Role, especially if you're playing in the D&D space, um, or you're just not familiar with the Exandria setting. What are some of the main themes or ideas that differentiate this setting with other 5e settings?
I find that the Taldore Reborn book really sums it up well. I think overall the setting is very much like other D&D settings. You can plug and play a lot of the usual tropes and archetypes. But it does specifically say that it's a world of moral grays, and that there are differences to traditional fantasy in that goblins, bugbears, orcs, those sorts of races that are humanoid are not inherently evil. They're not just built-in tokens to kill and loot like past fantasy games have been. They are thinking and feeling people, just like humans, elves, dwarves. And that even was expounded, that they said in the book, if you want, you could treat any creature with an intelligence over 6 as a thinking and feeling creature with many alignments, morals, and goals. Those are the main things that I find are differentiators that it specifically calls out for the setting.
Yeah, and then in general, that's where the direction of fifth edition is going, right? They're, especially with Monsters of the Multiverse, they're really expanding, at least for their neutral stance on races. This doesn't take away anything that they've printed before that's very Forgotten Realms centered. I think that's the big misconception, especially when Monsters of the Multiverse came out, that unfortunately a lot of other YouTubers and other people on Reddit and everywhere else are misinterpreting about that book, is that those are neutral stances for those characters, not necessarily tied to a specific setting. And then it's nice to see Exandria and Critical Role take double on that stance just for their own setting, um, to expand.
Yeah.
And I think the big takeaway from that aspect is you're really, as a player, you're allowed to kind of build what you want. You're not really tied to a specific, your character is always going to be evil sort of thing. You have this layer of complexity. We see this in Eberron also. They do that with that whole setting is shades of gray.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, like the biggest difference between Critical Role and Eberron and Forgotten Realms, just with that big line through it, this big thread, is that Exandria still has those fantasy tropes where there is going to be people that are just morally good, they are upstanding, and there's also, you're gonna have these people that are straight polarizing evil, while settings like Eberron, everybody's morally gray. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're just, everybody's like, they're kind of doing good, they're kind of doing bad. You're not really sure, and you have to navigate it based off your own character. And Exandria is one of those, just like Forgotten Realms. Nope. Yeah, there's morally gray, but good guys are good guys and bad guys are really bad.
Along with that, I've heard it said that Exandria is the Millennials' Faerun Forgotten Realms. Like, I think we're gonna start to see more and more content that's based in Exandria because it's so popular with the up and coming players as opposed to the seasoned veterans. I think that in addition to being setting neutral, they also become a little setting specific to Exandria, kind of funnily, because
Yeah.
Exandria is that same way.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. And what do you think, Chris? What do you think differentiates it?
So, me personally, I don't actually think it differs that much from other campaign settings. I mean, like you have the floating city of, I believe it's called Aor from campaign 2. I mean, there was a floating, city similar to that, I think, in the Forgotten Realms. I'm not
Yeah.
too familiar with that. And you have the Luxon, which is kind of a different I'm gonna butcher the goddess's name. It's the Drow goddess, the good one.
Elistray, I think.
Can't. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's how you say it.
Where, yeah, where you can draw parallels between that goddess and the Luxon beacon. So it's kind of like their alternative to that. So I think it's actually a really good example on how you should be using Fifth Edition, where you bend, break, and twist it to make it fit for your setting. That's how I kind of see Exandria.
Yeah, and that's true. You touch on another thing. There isn't really too much. I think that really hard differentiates it for something like a classic fantasy setting like for Forgotten Realms. But even then, Forgotten Realms draws upon like Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth. But even then, you
Yeah,
see the steps of progression where more magic is heavily influenced, and the heroes are more magical compared to Tolkien, Middle Earth, and it's very
Yeah.
much the same way in Exandria. So before I ask if there's really no differences, the only other thing I want to bring up that I think is the through line that I haven't seen them pick up post season or post campaign one is this technical or technological advancements. Everything so far, campaign 2 and 3 has been heavily looking at how magic advances their world or influences the world, and especially it's like ancient magic influences their world. But campaign 1 had a through line, especially through Percy, the gunslinger. For those that have watched the Critical Role cartoon, he's very prominent in the first season, but he has a gun. Like there's firearms in it. When the advancement of firearms and other non-magical technology happens, you're pretty much putting power into non-magical characters. So there's a big through line they haven't followed up with. I know they've hinted at it in a couple of the other books, the Exandria Reborn or Tal'Dorei Reborn, and I know they hinted at it in the original Tal'Dorei book that Green Ronin released. That after I believe after he takes over, take more spoilers. He takes his home back and he becomes the leader of his home. Um, they start a regiment of a military that are trained in firearms. So
Mhm.
that, and I think that's one of those things too. You have this draw of ancient power that you're kind of looking back in another theme of, well, humans or humanoids are advancing technologically to give themselves an even leg versus magic, and how do those two plot threads like kind of contrast and butt heads. And I think that's another thing people can draw on because you don't see that in Forgotten Realms, right?
Hmm.
You
Not
see,
that I know
yeah,
of.
most of the people they just outlaw no guns, no guns in my D&D, and
Mm.
and
yeah, I hear that a lot.
yeah, you see that a lot. But Ebron doesn't necessarily have guns because magic is part of like it's ingrained. It's an industry in their world. So the closest thing you're gonna get to guns is wands in that setting. But I think yeah, Exandria is different. Like, no, there's guns exist. They're very rare, but once you have them, what happens after that? And I think that's another thing you guys can draw upon if you're looking for characters, especially you want to play like a gunslinger. There's a bunch of gunslinger options out on DM's Guild too. You guys can look for. But with that, since the core of Exandria is not necessarily different from other standard fantasy settings, what can players draw on from those other settings to help them play in a Critical Role game.
So other settings of like Faerun and
Yeah,
Eberron, how
yeah,
to take things from that and play in an Exandria game.
yeah. And in terms of yeah, because pretty much if Exandria is very very similar to Forgotten Realms or other standard fantasy settings, what sort of themes? Because obviously that means those themes are going to be inside Exandria. What sort of themes can they just take, or what sort of ideas they could take from other settings that they can bring in that just fit within the world?
I think if there's a few examples of Matt Mercer enjoying other settings like Spelljammer, Eberron, those sorts of things. He's used the Gith. Those are very like intergalactic, astral type creatures. He's done stuff with the Far Realm, which goes over a lot with the Call of the Netherdeep book, like a lot of overlap of those concepts. So anything that's like otherworldly, what's the word? Like Cthulhu, not Orwellian. Gosh, I can't think of the word, but anything that's like Cthulhu based, that kind of stuff will work because there are the prime deities, like the greater gods that are like barred from the world by the divine gate, and then there's the betrayer gods that are the same. But then there's also like the demigods, like that actually can be in the world, and so there could be Cthulhu like aberrations, that give people power. So you got your warlocks and whatever you want to do with that. There's from Eberron. There's also like airships. Exandria. There are airships now, and there are materials. Residuum, I think is what it's called, and they that reminds me of some of the Eberron themes where they have special materials and they have airships, those sorts of things. And Matt's even brought in automatons, which are a lot like Warforged from Eberron, right?
Yeah.
He remixes it to make it his own for Exandria, like any good DM I think should do and have fun with. But there's a lot you can take from other settings and have fun with. I think I actually strongly suspect. I need to look at the timelines, but the way Campaign 2 ended reminds me a lot of what I just experienced as a player in the Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign. I was like, this is very similar. And so there's a lot you can take from Faerun and the Forgotten Realms as well. I mean, they have the Swords Coast.
Yeah.
Exandria has the Menagerie Coast. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, you could say that those are just names, Jordan. Will give us something more, but they have overarching concepts and cities that you can kind of say, okay, what's the equivalent of Baldur's Gate in Exandria? And you can run with that.
Yeah, and what about you, Chris? What are you thinking?
I had to draw on something, which is actually probably what I'm gonna run with when I play Call of the Netherdeep, is draw from the Drow in the Forgotten Realms. I mean, because at this point you have the Luxon Beacon in Exandria, you have Lolth, the Spider Queen as they call it in their in Exandria. Bring in Illustre. I'm butchering that name still. I don't know why I can't say it, but bring her into the mix as well, and then you have 3 players for Drow characters, and draw on that. Play into the Drow aspect, which is what I think they're doing in Exandria Unlimited, because I mean they have the vestige
Yep.
of the Spider Queen, and they have I think it's the Kato Geist from Campaign 2, who was like the champion of the Spider Queen. So you have a lot of like Drow stuff that I think they've kind of buried in the book and in all their campaigns that I think would be really interesting to play with. Like they even give little hints in Tal'Dorei Reborn that it's like, oh, there might be a Luxon beacon over in this village. There's like a group of people worshiping it. So I think there's a lot of good Drow stuff that you can play with.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen a lot of Drow stuff kind of peppered throughout, especially Exandria Unlimited with Loth in their big vestige. Again, big old spoiler if you haven't watched Exandria Unlimited. I highly
Right.
recommend it. I highly recommend catching that one. It's only 8 episodes, easier to catch up and watch compared to the main show, and it's a different feel. We have a different DM, Abria Eingard, DM that one, correct? I believe. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah,
Matt.
she killed.
Yeah, she killed it. And then Matt Mercer is a player in that one, and he had probably one of the most memorable characters in that whole cast. Like he played a dwarf, divine soul sorcerer dwarf that was just totally on brand for Critical Role, but very very different what we would see from Matt, what you would expect from a character from him. So it was awesome.
Yep.
Let's see. I'm going through the comments in the chat. Seth says the more sci-fi stuff that's been peppered into the game is what I really love. I realized the other day that all my characters and future characters have techno magic feels, and I'm very much actually kind of the same way. I like playing more knowledge-based characters and having magic is science take on a lot of stuff. Artificers like on my jam, and yeah, I a lot of my characters are that way when I build them for myself personally. Let's see. And then Stephen Harris said the word is probably Lovecraftian. I believe he was referring back to what you were
Yes.
speaking to,
Thank you.
Jordan. But
I
Lovecraft
was
was a bit of
blanking. Thank you.
but Lovecraft was a bit of a dingus, and a cosmic horror can stand on its own. And yes. Yes.
Very true.
Yeah. Yeah, and that brings up another thing, right? For a theme, I think that's another through line that you pick up in other settings for in Exandria is that the divine deities and demigods and other powerful beings are heavily trying to influence the world, either through other characters or through organizations. And that's another through line I believe you can pick up characters. Like you build your character off. We've seen it again, Percy, campaign 1. You saw it with him. He pretty much is a warlock without the warlock chassis. And campaign 2, you had Ford with a hexblade, and then his patron. And actually, I want to say campaign 1, you had Pike with her with the Everlight. With I forgot. I watched too much of the cartoon that I completely forgot what her god was in actual campaign 1.
Yeah, before they had to rebrand it to be not D&D IP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I believe hers was wasn't even D&D IP. I believe it was or not Eberron, a Pathfinder.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I mean, they came from Pathfinder,
Yeah.
so that makes sense.
It was a Pathfinder. Oh god, I could be wrong, but I believe it was that, and they just kind of shoehorned all of it in. And then campaign 3, who do we have that's kind of like that? Or actually, in campaign 2, you still have with Ford and in Melora, and then you had I'm already forgetting his Talison's backup character.
Caduceus.
Yeah, and then with the Wild Mother also, Melora also. And then campaign 3,
Yeah.
we have Laudna, and then she's a warlock, but we haven't really, as far as like the first few episodes I've seen, we haven't really gotten into what deities have like tried to influence her. I don't know if you guys can enlighten me on that. I don't know if they've really started to reveal anything yet.
They have. I've actually been trying to formulate a theory video about it because Laudna tells the group who her I won't spoil it, tells the group who her patron is that talks to her, and it really made people be like, "What?" Definitely worth watching that one. That's fun. Even if you just like look up the clip of like Laudna's patron on YouTube, enjoy that. There's some really good clips of it. But in campaign 2, Jester, she was a cleric to the Traveler, and the Traveler is a lesser god, like an archfey. Which, if you're just going by the book of what classes descriptions are, that is more of a warlock. But she was a cleric, so you can kind of tailor things to whatever you want to play. You don't have to say, "Oh, it's a lesser god, therefore I have to be a warlock." You can do a lot of different things.
Stephen Harris dropping it. Saren Ray was the Pathfinder god. Yep, so that was Pike's god
That's
in the
it.
campaign
Yep.
1. Yep.
There we go.
Thank you, Stephen, once more.
Thank you.
Dropping the knowledge.
Yep.
And then Devilham, I hope Critical Role explores the pre-Calamity as a setting at some point. It has a Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 15 vibe that D&D hasn't touched on yet. Final Fantasy 7 was the game that built to me. It was one of those games that I can always go back to and play growing up. So even if Wizards decides, oh, we're gonna do like a semi-modern fantasy setting in the vein of Final Fantasy 7, I'm sold. Like, just give it to me pump it into my veins. All right. Okay. And then I guess we'll jump into the next one, unless you guys have anything to say about this or other themes that you guys think people can pull from for in the bigger part of the world.
one of the big themes, and I
Yeah.
actually made a short before Campaign 3 started where I made some predictions, and one thing I said is that I think Matt is going to do a lot with other planes, particularly the Shadowfell and the Feywild. And I picked up on this at the end of Campaign 2, and I guessed he still has an itch for it, and so far I think he is definitely still exploring the idea is chaos versus order, and I think that's a big underlying theme, and that's one reason there's so much moral grayness
Yeah.
in Exandria is from that kind of mindset that he comes from and what interests him. Talking about Matt Mercer, yeah, that's a big one.
That'd be interesting. Having I always saw that the Shadowfell and the Feywild are kind of like dark, or just the dark reflections and other, or just reflections of the material plane, the regular plane. That's always something
Yeah,
I would enjoy playing with in a game too. Just kind of maybe like a Stranger Things influence too. You kind of bounce back and forth between both these worlds and kind of figure things
exactly.
out. All right. And also, if you guys have any questions in the chat, go ahead and drop them. We will go ahead and answer them to help you play and build a character for an Exandria, call it Netherdeep campaign. All right, and the next question I wanted to ask: what events from the stream or the animated show could a player use to also inspire the character? So obviously, this is going to get into the spoiler territory. So if you guys haven't watched it and plan to watch it, cover your ears because we have to kind of get into some certain things for this one. I don't know,
I
Chris,
think.
or yeah, Jordan,
Oh,
go
go
ahead and
ahead.
start.
Chris, start. Okay, I'll start.
Yeah.
um, one thing that I think is super interesting as an event was the destruction of Draconia
Oh yeah.
and the
Ooh, that's a good one.
greatly reducing the population of dragon blood, which are dragonborn in Exandria. And so they're a very rare race, but also Draconia had a very um, stringent, strict class system where it was very like wealthy, powerful, and poor, and it was funnily based on the whether your dragon blood had a tail or not, and if you had a tail, you were like more draconic, you were pure, and you were like upper class, and if you didn't, you were a Ravenite, Ravenite. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's based on it their home being in the Dream Moth Ravine, so not like Raven, but like Ravinite, maybe that's the way you say it. And they were slaves, you know. So now that's all done away with, and they're scattered to the winds. So I think it's really interesting and pretty recent in your history if you choose to be a Dragonblood, a Dragonborn in Call of the Netherdeep, especially because Fizzbands just gave you improved Dragonborn races.
Yeah.
So races got updated, really interesting lore, recent in the history of Exandria to explore. I think that's a really good event to tailor a character to.
Big time. There's some of the plot threads you can pull on that is you're you're in a society structure, right? And all of a sudden that gets blown away. What if you were a dragon blood, which were the more the higher class? What do you do now that you're no longer rich? You're no longer a noble. You're titleless. You're just a refugee now. What sort of path are you covering after that? And the same in the vein of the Ravenite, you were a slave, lower class, and now you're free. What do you do after that? And then is your character still going to hold grudges between the other people, or are they going to want to seek revenge? Are you going to try to restore quote unquote order? What kind of things are you going to do? And those are things too you can do for a villain in a campaign, right? Like you're a
Yeah.
dragon blood trying to restore the order. You have a villain that's a dragon blood that's trying to restore the order through nefarious means, and heroes can go in and
Good idea.
stop them. Yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
those are really fun plot threads. Yeah, Draconia. There's a lot of reasons why outside a game that happened. Um, for those that watch
Yeah.
Critical, they had a was it an I don't even remember how many players they have. They have a lot. But they had one player that was playing Tiberius Stormwind, a very memorable early on character that was their only arcane caster outside of Scanlan. And then through some stuff that was happening behind the scenes, he was asked to exit the game. But after that, after he was asked to exit, then after the Briarwood arc, they sort of collapsed that whole Draconia thing, or the whole nation, to have it have less of an influence. And I have a feeling that might also have to be with some of the stuff that was happening behind the scenes to allow him to keep his intellectual property. 'Cause that was
Yeah.
one thing that they were really, really good about, at least early on. Now that they're pretty much a big old company on their own, everything they make is for Critical Role. So it,
Mhm.
it it's cool that it builds like this little niche that they haven't touched on, and I wish they kind of did, but at the same time, it makes sense why they haven't. So yeah. All right, Chris. What do you think what events do you think they can pull from either the show
So it's
or
a
in the campaign?
it's a very, very, very small event, but I think has a lot of potential. In campaign 1, they alluded to Gilmore being a rune child,
No.
and then I think
Mm.
they dropped the name of it in Exandria Unlimited. When they met Gilmore, I believe he mentioned that he was a rune child during that conversation. The lore of them in Teldor Reborn essentially says that they're kind of secretive. They're very rare because people want their power. Like, so they'll be kidnapped to be turned into slaves or for people trying to harness their powers, but they don't really like utilize that type of thing in the campaign. So I think it's something that the DM can have a lot of fun with, that the player can kind of make their own. So it's a very small event, but it has a lot of potential to be something really special if it's utilized by the DM and the player.
Yeah,
Like, that's what I would run with.
yeah, yeah, it's been a while since they've actually brought up the Rune Child thing. I think it might have to kind of do with I don't know. There is still a sense that Critical Role still playing ball with wizards, so they're not necessarily including a lot of their own homebrew or their own product stuff, which I thought they very well were gonna do with campaign 3. That was the little bit I watched, but they're still being nice and actually not hinting at their own work and really trying to bring in anything that WotC Wizards of the Coast has brought into the game. Like I think after the Blood Hunter stuff happened in campaign 2, they kind of really actually a lot of the homebrew in campaign 2 because it was a little bit more like heavy because we had Ford with Oath of the Open Sea, right, for a
Yep.
paladin.
Mhm.
Yep.
People critiquing the balance of everything because I believe the channel divinity for Path of the Open Sea, at least where it was before it got printed, was super busted, and it pretty much saved them on the final fight of that campaign with
Yeah.
Lucian. So yeah, I think they're campaign 3 where I think we're seeing them kind of go back to less. Oh, here's some cool homebrew that we're doing that we're gonna potentially sell you guys, and yeah, it's not broken. We don't want the criticism, and we're gonna go here's some WotC stuff, please. And I could be mistaken. I'm thinking they might have. I might just be out of my depth on that one because aren't a couple of them actually doing some homebrew subclasses right now,
Yep.
but they're not sold. They're because they didn't. They're not until they're reborn.
Right.
Yeah,
They people speculate,
They
oh, what is this subclass that Ashton is for Barbarian, or and it's a custom class for FCG too.
yeah,
There was a recent interview where Matt said it was a custom subclass.
empathy domain for fresh
yeah,
cut grass.
Yep.
yeah. So I could just be completely wrong that they're playing ball with WotC. It just seems that
No,
uh,
you're right.
yeah,
It just depends how much and on what,
yeah.
right? But they definitely do. Call of Netherdeep is a WotC book and call it Critical Role,
Yeah.
so they definitely play ball.
And we have a question from Wolfsbane regarding a character, and this actually might touch upon some plot threads you were thinking about, Chris. Wolfsbane is saying, I had a character concept for a male half elf drow born from a slave and a female highborn drow. How would you rework this concept in Alexandria or in Exandria in the whole setting of Critical Role?
How would you rework it, huh? Um, that's very interesting. That's very interesting.
So
So,
a highborn elf and a slave. Is that what it was?
Yeah,
yeah,
a highborn drow specifically, so
Drow.
and a half elf
I
drow.
I don't think you would actually have to rework it. You would have to establish something because they haven't really established like the bad drow like hierarchy or how like they live or anything like that. So you'd first have to establish in your Exandria, okay, how are these how are these bad drow? Because I'm assuming when you said born from a slave and a female highborn, that this character would be coming from the bad drow of Exandria. You'd first have to establish that. So I don't really think you would have to rework the concept. You would have to more so, I guess, establish the concept in the world because they haven't really developed it themselves yet.
Yeah, because the only other drow, the heavily established drow um players in the setting is, I believe they're from the Wildmount, the campaign
Yeah,
2,
they're
right?
from the Kryn dynasty.
Green Dynasty. And maybe you can that's the only thing I think you can maybe rework it, is that there is maybe your mother was some sort of high level official in the Kryn Dynasty, and then um whatever, not necessarily a slave, but somebody that wasn't necessarily drow, an affair of some sort, and your character is born out of wedlock, and maybe that's a plot thread your character can follow, is just trying to figure out which highborn your who your mother is, and trying to kind of figure out that path to where that leads you. Or and that there's some establish some character growth. Necessarily removing the slave aspect of it, but maybe play with the whole idea of social order and hierarchies with your character. You've been living with your character's father for some time, and they're not necessarily in the highest standing. And even possibly they could just be a character that's on the opposite end of that political conflict. They can be from because the Kryn Dynasty, they were in conflict with which other political faction, which country? Been a while since I've seen campaign.
Wendalian Empire, I believe.
Yeah, and maybe your character's father can be from that opposing faction, the Wendalian Empire, and that's part of why the political conflict. And there's a split between your parents. Maybe that's a thing you can play with. That'd be interesting. That puts you like
Or
smack
maybe your
dab in.
character.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say maybe your character is a Luxemborn.
Yeah.
Maybe your character died near a Luxon beacon, and sucks up your soul, and then you're reborn eventually, and you're on like a kind of a quest of self discovery because you're relearning your memories from your previous life, and maybe you could run with that, and that would bring you to the Kryn dynasty that way.
You got any ideas, Jordan?
I was leaning towards the Luxon too, so I was looking up some quick lore, and then Chris brought it up at the end there. So basically, if anyone doesn't know what the Luxon is the dark elves have these little beacons. It looks kind of like a Rubik's cube made out of a chandelier. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like this thing that makes it so they can continue their process of reincarnation. And so that's a really interesting point in the lore to explore as a character. And I think that's a big part of being an elf in any setting, is to think about what it means to live so long and what the cycle of reincarnation means to you and how that affects what you do with your life. And so whatever lore you figure out for your parentage or lineage, I think definitely look into some of that elf lore in Exandria and think, okay, how does my effective immortality affect how I live my life? And you can find some really good nuggets doing that.
We actually got a couple more questions on how to fit certain characters into the setting. Emiliano said, I got a build inspired by V from Arcane League of Legends that I'd really love to use, but I'm not quite sure how to apply that vigilante style on Exandria's world, as I really don't know that much. So I had to look up, because I actually haven't seen Arcane, and I'm vaguely familiar with League. And now that I see just the image of this character, at least in League of Legends, this screams Armor Artificer, and you're going to use your Thunder Gauntlets. That's what I'm thinking. And for me, that anything that sort of a tech based or tech magic-y based, I would want to put you in Whitestone. Like, maybe this is coming out of or maybe you've stolen what's her, I can't remember her name, and I just watched the last few episodes of Exandria or of Vox Machina, and it's pretty much the other tinkerer that used to be part of Whitestone that betrayed them. And I know she left some stuff behind too, that maybe your character discovered some of that stuff. And the reason you're a vigilante is you're trying to do good with stuff that evil people did, and you're also trying to keep that stuff a secret. So that's why you're traveling. So that'd be a way to do some vigilante style stuff. Or yeah, that's where my headspace is at. What would you guys do?
Yeah, same answer as what you said. I'm not as familiar with League, and I haven't watched Arcane. I do play Dota though, and I have played League before. Um, so based on what you said, I totally agree. That would be a great one. Maybe you're even a member of the Whitestone Rifle Corps, because part of their lore is the technology that they have. Like, they protect it with their lives, because if other people get a hold of it, they gain that technology. Or maybe you're someone who stole that kind of technology so that you can go carry out a vendetta against something that you're upset about. It would be interesting to have. I go back to the Draconians again. Let's say you're a dragon blood and you want to gain power, so you try to find magic technology to help you in your endeavors, which is a lot like what Percy did, but he didn't know he was making a pact, that fed him the information. But yeah, I think hopefully there's some ideas in there, but that's all I'll say for now, I guess.
Okay, I remember the name because I had to look it up right now. I just saw it. Anna Ripley. That was the
And
other
Ripley,
the opposing tinker slash artificer esque character that is
Oh,
featured in the cartoon.
additionally, she and the Briarwoods came from Wildmount. Maybe you're someone from Wildmount who worked with her back then and got left behind, or you apprenticed to someone who had worked with her, and so you kind of pick up some technology along the way uh, from that, and maybe you don't realize the heritage of your weaponry and your technology. That would be an interesting way to go about it.
You got some ideas, Chris?
I don't know anything about Arcane or League of Legends. But I would go with because I tried to think of something a little different than you guys. I would put the character in Vasselheim.
Ooh.
It's a very anti-arcane society. If you want to go the vigilante route, maybe your character's more of like a fighter barbarian kind of thing. Um, and you're learning how to you already learned to adapt to the world without using arcane. Maybe you're using technology, and being in that vast area of Vasselheim. That's how um, you go about being a vigilante. Because they have crime and stuff there too. But if you're leaning away from arcane as much as you can just to be a vigilante. I don't know V. I don't know League, so I don't know, maybe they use magic. I'm not really too familiar with League.
Yeah, one other idea I just realized, there's a faction called the Arcana Pansophical, and they're kind of like magic police, but they're not like part of any government, but like any like school of magic or anywhere where magic is studied, they probably have like one person from this organization, and they basically log anyone who uses magic, and they look for people who are misusing it, because they try to prevent another problem like in the Age of Arcana, where um, a lot of magic was misused. People would try to become gods, and that led to like the calamity and stuff like that. So Ghostbusters, Magic Police, like whatever you want to call them, I don't know. But that could be an interesting form of vigilantism, because they carry out their punishments and their arrests outside of local governments. And so that's a very structured way to be a part of a vigilante organization, kind of.
I agree. Hopefully that answers your question. We actually have another one this time, taking some Magic the Gathering and plopping it right into Exandria. So Seth wants to know, how would you recommend dropping the Strixhaven colleges into Exandria? That is a good question. And you guys have any ideas?
The Lyceum comes to mind, but is that... I never really got if that was like a magic school or just like a library. Do you know, Chris?
I'm pretty sure the Lyceum is a library, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Um, I would just drop it in. Strixhaven has its own um like plane or something. Like, it's on a different plane, right? So you could literally just drop it in, where you could have it be like the Hogwarts of the setting where they're extremely selective on who they bring in. Maybe it's still a bit of a mystery to the world. People don't really know much about it, but I would go like kind of like a Hogwarts route. Like maybe not, message via owl or anything like that. But yeah, I would just drop it in. It has its own playground, it has its own plane. So I think it would actually be pretty easy to include it like that.
Actually, yeah, I just pulled up the Lyceum because I remember in campaign 2 that was like a big like sort of goal for especially at the beginning of the game, since there were so many magic users. They wanted to go to a magic college and just keep going, somehow get to a magic college. And then yeah, the Lyceum also acts as an arcane college, and so maybe the characters did use it as a maybe when it was featured, it's mainly used as a library, but it is a full school, and you could just reflavor everything in Strixhaven as nope, it's you're an Emon and you're studying at the Lyceum, and then each little school faction is just covering a specific kind of style of magic that people are mainly using as their focus. So
You could spread it out too, because right now in Marquette, Imogen and Laudna, their hook to Marquette was that they're looking to try to get to what is it, the Moonlight Conservatory or something,
Yeah.
yeah,
which is like a library but also a school, and you need like a sponsor to get in. It's very much like that Hogwartsy style, I guess. Not little kids, but And you could also take some of the factions like the Claret orders, where their thing is all about like hunting entities and creatures, and like the blood domain is based on that, like hunting vampires and that sort of stuff. You could do like different ones in different places, and you could work with your DM to just figure out like how a faction might train up its recruits and make it kind of like a maybe actually that would actually be more like Hogwarts, because there were different schools in different countries, right? And then they would kind of come together for things as
yeah,
opposed to like a campus with all of them. So that's another way to go about it.
I 100% agree. All right, and then like Chris, you said the same thing. You just kind of just plop it as is. There's nothing stopping you from just saying this thing just exists in my Exandria. This can just be another college amongst many that exists and functions the way it does in the Magic the Gathering settings, and it just does. Mm, yeah, that's a lot of different ways you can treat it. We still got a couple questions. I know we've touched on some of these topics a little bit as we were talking about. So the next thing, oh, we were still talking about events that you can take inspiration from. I have three, and they mainly are all fallout of campaign 1 because that's the one I'm most familiar with, but it also sets the stage for a lot of stuff you're starting to see now. I believe there was little hints of campaign 2, and now with Tal'Dorei Reborn out, I think what they early on hidden in some of the campaign 3 that I've watched, um especially in Exandria Unlimited, how much of a major player the campaign 1 characters are. So one is a Ashari if you're looking to play a member that's a character that's tied to the elements. Keyleth, the druid from campaign 1, she's now the leader of the Ashari. She's fully in charge of all the elemental clans of druids and other elemental based casters and characters in their society. And you could be just like Liam's character in campaign 3 and Exandria Limited. He's a member of the Ashari, but he has no magical powers whatsoever. He's just a fighter.
Fighter. Yeah.
Just good old fighter.
Just a dude.
Yeah, just a dude that does stuff. That's it. So it'd be interesting to see to play a character that is under a new unified ruler and see how that plays out. That's kind of what we're seeing with Liam's character right now. And then also Whitestone has new rulers, Percy and Vex. They are in charge of Whitestone. They're and being either a member of the Rifle Corps that's there, or just trying to help rebuild a city that was pretty much ravaged by the Briarwoods, and coming out of that and what kind of implications that happens. I think Laudna's tied to Whitestone. That's for the little bit I've watched. She's tied to it
Yeah.
too. So you're kind of seeing it. And then obviously the Raven Queen has like a super major impact towards the tail end of campaign 1. And she has a bigger presence in the world than what people realize. Blood Hunters, the original Blood Hunter, because I've been digging into that a lot more, is tied to the Raven Queen. So
Yep.
it's one of those things that you can play a Blood Hunter, Blood Domain, cleric if you're in Tal'Dorei Reborn, or the Blood
Blood
Magic.
magic.
Yeah, I think it's the Blood Magic Wizard.
Yeah.
All those you can play and lean into your ties to the Raven Queen, and if you're just looking into just playing anything out of any of the other books, Grave Domain Cleric is also probably a strong one for the Raven Queen. Anything that's tied to death and trying to keep the lines between life and death pretty clean, and that can be a uh, good plot thread you can follow through. Especially maybe your guy in charge of you that's kind of your handler is Vax.
Mhm.
He is a pretty much became a paladin of the Raven Queen towards the end of the campaign. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
a dark angel you answer to.
yeah,
Some other ideas that came to my mind. A kind of silly one is from Traveler Con. You could have been one of the Traveler's early followers, and then you found out like it was all bunk, and you're like, "Well, I guess I'm looking for a new god now." Like you could be like that kind of character. Also, at the end of campaign 2, they introduced a new race, which I used to do this with some of my games when we introduced like Warforged or any race. We'd often have like an event happen, and then they'd be there. Isocross with the automatons
Mhm.
and Warforged, you could have been something that recently awoke, and FCG is an example of that. So like Critical Role themselves, they are doing that with the events of their campaigns, right? They're making characters out of them. Laudna is based on Whitestone, and then you could also have some fun with the campaign 2 peace treaty that happened. Maybe you were a soldier and you were very zealous, and all of a sudden there's peace, and you're like, well, now what do I do? You know, maybe you do become a vigilante in some way, going back to the V idea, and you kind of say, well, if the king's not going to stay at war as we should to get revenge for my family or something like that, I will. There's a lot of things you could do, lots of different events that are fun to explore.
yeah, 100% agree. You, you kind of have to dig into the the live streams and the show a bit. I think once they start doing the more seasons of the cartoon, especially let's see, I know they're up for 2 more seasons. So after I think Amazon really greenlit them before even campaign or season 1 happened, it's gonna be easier way to digest what's going on. I know they do like a quick recap, like animated recap on their YouTube channel for campaign 2 that they've been doing, and they haven't really done it yet for campaign 3 yet. And just kind of watching those kind of just see what major events happening, or you could just deep dive into wikis and just go down the rabbit
Yeah.
hole. All right. Also, I wanted to dig into really quick since I'm looking at the time right now. We're really already pushing. Um, I really want to look at the 3 pillars of sort of the game, the three major sort of character pillars. So I want to look at first divine characters. So we're looking at paladins and clerics and sometimes monks. What what can players draw upon when it comes to the setting? I know we touched upon this earlier. So if somebody wants to make a character powered by divine, how should they look at the relationship between deities? Because in Exandria, it is a little different from Forgotten Realms and Eberron, slightly. It kind of takes inspiration from both and makes it its own thing.
Yeah, you can look at a list of different deities and see what they're about. Just like anytime you play a holy divine character, look at the deities, see if any of them align with you, and just learn more about them. I think that can help a lot. And then there's also factions like the Library of the Cobalt Soul for monks. That's not really divine, but we're talking about monks. And then there's the what's it called? Oh, the League of Miracles. There's actual factions for divine based characters. The Claret Order that I mentioned earlier is one of them, which is based on hunting down certain creatures like vampires. And so, yeah, pick a deity that sounds fun to you. Learn about their iconography and everything, their commandments, which I like that the Taldore book actually gives you commandments from different deities to give you more ideas. And then look and find a faction or something. Figure out what their goals are and how that would feed into your character's goals or anything like that. You can also get NPCs from those because there's often prominent people listed for those factions, and you can say like maybe that person helps train you or you're related to them in some way. Those are my quick ideas.
All right. What about you, Chris?
I would make it personal, like a personal relationship. I mean, you see it with Saren Ray and Pike. You saw it with the Wild Mother and Ford and Caduceus. Their relationship with their god, it seems to me like more of like a parent and a child kind of a relationship. I mean, you could go the traditional route, like in Vasselheim. You know, the worshippers of Bahamut over there. It's more of like a church kind of thing. But I would make it personal. It makes it good for role playing purposes. It makes it more personal in your journey. But that's what I would do. Treat it more of like a parent and a child.
Yeah, and that's one of the big through lines I realized when kind of looking back when I was trying to answer my own question. Uh, the depictions of the gods in Exandria are very much come down to a personal take on with your character. And while you can stay, there's room for like the traditional, as Christy said, traditional churches and stuff. You're, it seems like the characters have much more of a chosen feel. The adventurers have it when their faith is their strongest in their god. So just like Forgotten Realms, the gods exist, and but unlike Forgotten Realms, they just don't willy nilly just come in and impact the world because they can't. And the only way they impact the world is through how strong the faith is of their followers, and then they impact the world through their faith of that follower. They can do small miracles that help the follower. We saw this at the end of campaign 2. Spoiler, when they brought back I already forgot his name. Talison's first character from campaign 2.
Molly,
Yeah,
Lucian.
yeah, the
Yeah.
Molly Lucian thing. They brought back Molly to some extent, and that was pretty much through a personal faith of Talison's other character,
Lucius.
Lucian. Caduceus. Yeah, it's like yeah. So it's those things, and then you'll see it in the cartoon. The whole Pike's whole plot thread in that cartoon is that her faith with Sarenrae, how it's very personal, and she only becomes empowered because she realizes that she's the one in charge of that relationship, and she's the one that is that can only determine how strong of a role Sarenrae is going to play in her life. Yeah, and then Rivrimo, my buddy Mondo brings up another point. Theros got the gods involvement right, and yeah, and that actually too, if you're trying to look for ways as a DM and to empower your players that are going to play cleric characters, you can use a Theros book and use the gods section and have those little powers that they get for following the faith to give them little bonuses, and then actually any character that's following a god, because we saw that in Ford in campaign 2 became a paladin of Melora, and then I believe I want to say actually yeah with Ford, like that's the biggest one. He wasn't necessarily a cleric. He had divine powers, but you could still give another character some sort of little divine hint the more that they believe in something without having them go full on cleric or paladin or monk. So Theros is a really really good book. All right. Okay, let's jump into Wizards. That's what I want to see. So Wizards played a very very powerful role in campaign 2. They're pretty much, I think, arcane forces, and especially with the Luxon Beacon, were at the forefront of that. And then if you watch the cartoon in campaign 1, wizards were pretty much advisors to nobility, like in most standard fantasy tropes, or they were the ones kind of doing the evil. You'll see it in campaign 1 again, especially the cartoon with the Briarwoods. So if a person is wanting to play some sort of arcane caster, a wizard, a sorcerer, an artificer, a bard, what ideas and themes can they take from this the setting of Exandria, and what impact should that have on their character? I think it's a little different from a cleric.
To me, the big one is the issue that the Arcana Pansophical tries to deal with is previous misuse of magics almost destroyed the world, right? And allowed the betrayer gods to return, demons, fiends, all those sorts of things, the calamity. And so they now preserve the truth of magic, is what they say. And it's about, and they have like almost like this paladin order description. I think the Arcana Pansophical would actually be great for a Watcher's paladin, because you're just on the lookout for deviants, you know. And they have these tenets like though the school of necromancy shall be restricted to none, in the interest of magical study and understanding, the animation of the dead is a violation of the truth. Like, that just sounds like a paladin
Yeah.
crusade oath to me, you know. So that sounds really cool to me. The High Elves are a great place to become a wizard. There's also the Cerberus Assembly that was very crooked, and there's a lot of very intense stuff that happens to them, like with Caleb. There's also the worshippers of the Whispered One, Vecna, who remain and try to seek artifacts and ways to return him to power after the events of Campaign 1. You know, that could be very wizard-like. And then there's also a very prominent arcanist, Allura, from the Taldore Council, and she is said to use adventurers and mercenaries the most of, or one of the most in the council, and utilize them because she's getting old and she can't take care of stuff herself. And so maybe you are someone who's like assigned to her, she hired you because you have your arcane power. So there's actually, I think, a lot you can do with wizards, especially if you dig into the whole magic as technology and what that means for you to use certain spells, and how magic almost destroyed the world when it was misused, and how it affects other planes. Because that's another thing, is like there's a concept of magical pollution in a lot of D&D settings, and so like the Shadowfell kind of gets messed up every time someone on the material plane uses like ninth level spells and those sorts of things, and those can be interesting points in your character story to think about. Maybe you are hesitant to use magic because you know the consequences of it, or maybe you are bold and brash and you don't really care. You just want more power, or you want to show that you are smart to your dad after he thought you'd be a failure. I don't know, but those are some of my ideas.
I know we just talked about clerics and like the divine, but if I were to make a wizard, I would go cleric orders. I think it would be fascinating to play a wizard that instead of being bestowed power by a god, you're learning hemocraft, and it's like you're still, worshiping the Raven Queen, but you're more so earning your abilities rather than it just being given to you. I think there would be a lot of interesting, especially if you have like a necromancer also in your party,
Yeah.
or an undead warlock. I think it'd be really cool to have this more priest-like wizard in a situation like that. I think there's a lot you could play with like Hemocraft, the Claret Orders, the Raven Queen. That would make for a really fun wizard.
And then you also mentioned bards, Josh.
Yes.
There's the Golden Grin faction.
Oh yeah.
I think they're pretty cool, and they are all about like, what does it say? Storytellers, dancers, bards, united to subvert the rule of King Drassig. So if you're a bard, you could actually be kind of like a freedom fighter and a teller of stories and an exposer of truths about those in power. So if you don't like all the wealthy people in charge of things, then you could be a draconian who you're saying who used to be a slave Ravenite, a tailless dragonborn, and now you're going to other places doing your bard thing, singing songs and doing theatrical acts, exposing the wealthy slavers of other places, even if they don't have like formal slaves. They, maybe you see it as them enslaving their population with their wealth and power, and you kind of stick it to them in that way, like some kind of Shakespeare Robin Hood. I don't know. That could be a fun concept for you.
Oh yeah, big time. Is it the Golden Grin? That's what they are. That's what it is.
Yeah,
Or
the golden is it Golden Grin or Golden Grinners? It's the Golden Grin, and they're
yeah.
the Grinners, and it says they include among their ranks spiritual leaders, artists, musicians, innkeepers, and anyone who is want to do good outside the public eye. So
Yeah.
could be a lot of different
That
people.
was probably like one of the coolest things that was tied to Scanlan's background that they never got into in campaign 1, because the Scanlan, the bard, you don't see it in campaign or in the cartoon much, but pretty much Scanlan is Eminem. Like that, it's who the character is. It's Eminem, and then his friend that got him into the whole bard thing and the whole act was Dr. Drenzel, which is Dr. Dre, which is like a half orc. And yeah, and then they'll get into it more in the cartoon. If you've seen campaign 1, he has a daughter, that's also named similar to Eminem's daughter. And yeah, it's just that pretty much what Scanlan is, just a big pervert that's actually just Eminem.
I
So
didn't know that.
yeah,
That's funny.
I didn't know that either. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. That's why I realized it, and then Matt hinted at, or pretty much said straight up, "Well, yeah, that's Dr. Dre. That's Dr. Drenzel."
There's Slim Shady and then there's Short Shady, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's see here. You walkthrough brings up a good point about Call of the Netherdeep. The campaign starts out in Jorhas, which is in Wildmount, and is looking at the region for inspiration. So looking at the region for inspiration makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. So the cool thing about Call of the Netherdeep, you can get if you have the Wildmount book. It has a bunch of adventures you can just start off with, and then from those adventures you could jump into Call of the Netherdeep because it starts off at 3 or 5 or something like that, and then the adventures in the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount end off at that starting point. So it's a perfect jumping off for those looking into it, especially wanting to get involved in the world.
And Jorhas has a lot of different locations within it. And so starting off in Jorhas, basically think like a blighted land that was really ruined by the calamity the last time everything really went wrong in the world. And there's all kinds of like remnant horrible creatures there and oddities. So you have a lot of room, I think, to make some really odd characters. There's also the Blight Shore nearby, which is said to have like the fell energy, shadow fell energy, whatever, that makes people turn into hollow ones, which is basically Exandria's like reborn concept where
Yeah.
you're like brought back to life somehow. There's like a bunch of like marshes, there's moors, woods, the Penumbra Range for mountains and stuff. There's a lot of different geographies and peoples that exist in this like very ruined, dark place. And not all of it is that way, right? But there's like some very interesting places that have been altered. It's almost like a Chernobyl, magical Chernobyl in some places. And then there's like, yeah, I definitely recommend looking into Jorhas and looking around that which includes Draconia. That's where the Dreamoth Ravine is. And so Draconia is there. So again, I guess I'm advocating people to play Dragonborns in Call of the Netherdeep because I keep bringing it up, but it's relevant to Jorhas that you were made a refugee like right there in Jorhas, and you're a Dragonborn, a Dragonblood there.
100%. Like I wasn't too keen on Call of the Netherdeep, even though I'm going to dedicate like a whole month to it. But after now, I'm starting to watch a lot of the stuff. It's going to be an interesting campaign. Definitely. I'm not sure if my play group's going to get into it because not everybody in my group's a Critical Role. Watchers, they're aware of it, but we just sort of play our own thing. But it's something that's pretty interesting. The last thing I want to get into, because everybody always forgets about marshals, but martial classes and characters, some people just want to swing a sword and hit stuff. So where are some places they can draw inspiration from to kind of fit themselves in the setting?
One is the Brawlers League, which is a pretty obvious one. Grog participates in that. The Whitestone Rifle Corps, again, is more for like firearms, but that's a martial thing to do. There's a faction called the Clasp, which is basically the Mafia, and they seem to people, it says, as if they just want to profit, but they actually invest in like the prosperity of civilization because a thriving city is a profitable one, it says. And so they do what the wealthy and powerful can't do with their own hands under the table. So that's one way. And that in a group called the Myriad, you could do spy networks and rogue type stuff. But you don't have to be a rogue, right? You could be a bruiser who is the enforcer with those sorts of groups. Maybe you're a barbarian who was cast out of his or her tribe, and now they've found a home in the underbelly of societies, and they secretly hate being part of cities, but they're kind of doomed to it because they were cast out or something like that. The Craghammer dwarves are pretty interesting. I'm not sure how much they venture out, but it's up to you, right? If you want to do something with that. And I guess the Cobalt Soul comes up again. You could be basically like Bo. I feel like no one's going to want to play that because I feel like Bo already played what people would do with that.
Yeah.
But it's something. So that's my rapid fire ideas that you could do. But as far as like your origins and stuff, maybe we can talk more about it. But I'll hand the mic over so I don't just ramble on.
All right, Chris, where do you see people being able to draw inspiration from martials?
I think pretty much everything was already was already covered there. But I would someone brought it up in chat. Sorry, I forgot your name. But I think the vigilante route has a lot that you could play with there. I mean, you saw it kind of in the Darrington Brigade one shot with the owlbear.
Yeah,
I don't know if you guys got that,
yeah,
but
yeah.
that was pretty awesome. I would, because if you go to vigilante route, I feel like you could use religion, you could use the class. Like, there's a lot of different things that you could play and bounce off of. I would go. So yeah, I would go the vigilante route. Maybe you're a Luxon born and you're trying to, you know, redeem your past life because you died because by someone in the class and you're trying to break it down. There's a lot of different things that you could do, or a hollow one. Like if you need inspiration on the hollow one, Laudna's a hollowed one, so you can kind of look at that and see how she plays it. But I think the vigilante route would be a lot more fun than being like in a official organization in Wildmount.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, for me, I don't know. Like martials are compared to how the rest of the world plays out. Martials are, I think, a harder kind of pin down. You guys gave a lot of
Definitely.
kind of good ideas of where people can just place it. In terms of origins, this will be the last thing. In terms of origins, what kind of tools and stuff can people draw upon to kind of really just dig into the setting?
One tool is in the Taldore Reborn book, where it goes over the different lineages, races that are available in Exandria, or at least are prominent. And it gives a lot of suggestions, just like most D&D books, where it gives you like a D8 table of like your flaws, goals, those sorts of things. Like one was really interesting if you want to be with the Ashari, where the Air Ashari took you in after like a giant eagle just dropped you off. You don't know who your true parents are, and you love the Ashari, but you always wonder, stuff like that. There's there's so much you can gain. That those are really good tools. But also the other D&D books, like if you want to look at even like if you wanted to be a hollow one like Laudna, look at Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft and look up the Reborn in there, and there's some cool ideas where you basically could be someone who has like a ghost arm, or you look normal but really you've got a bunch of stitches like some kind of Frankenstein's monster, or you are constantly scratching yourself because there's straw on the inside of you, like you're not a real person. Like some really interesting things you could do with that book, in addition to like any class you want to play. Like Xanathar's Guide to Everything was really good about giving you tools to build your character once you find a subclass that you like. Tasha's the same way. Really great tools out there.
What about you, Chris? Where can people draw to create origins and tie the character to the game or to Exandria?
Now we're not sponsored by Critical Role, but I would have to say you have to have the Taldor Reborn book. It has so much stuff that you could like base your character on. Like for example, it says in the book Keyleth is looking for someone to pass on her vestige to. You could play off of that. It introduces the concept of mixing races. Like there's the like Dragonborn elf. Like it kind of gives you rules on how to like you can mix races. You also have my mind went completely blank on the next point that I was gonna the tiefling. Percy and Vex have a daughter who's a tiefling. It
Super.
introduces the yeah, it's super interesting that because he made a pact with his like I forgot
Orthax, is it?
Orthax, yes, that resulted in their youngest daughter being born as a tiefling. So it has a lot of and even Vax, or the champion of ravens, goes into detail on how he still plays a role in the world, kind of being like the weapon of the Raven Queen. You could play with that a bit. It has a lot of different things that you could base your character off of or help to influence your character. So I would say that book is like a must to have.
Yeah, and for me, I would say Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. I believe the Heroic Chronicle is pretty much a build them up system to have your character smack dab put them into at least in the Wildmount region. It's another good tool. It's a book a lot of people slept on. If you weren't a fan of Critical Role, it sold a lot. But if you weren't in other D&D circles, I saw this very prominent online with YouTube. A lot of people didn't recommend picking up, or if you just weren't a fan of Critical Role, you didn't really pick it up. But it is a great book. If they didn't come out with Monsters of the Multiverse, I would say you pick that book up because they reprinted so many races, and it was the first official printing of the turtle that you would have. And then Hero Chronicle takes you pick your you pick your background and everything, and then there's a chart, and you just can roll on it to kind of figure out and follow that path. And then I believe Xanathar's Guide to Everything was mentioned. The whole Here Is Your Life section is another setting neutral um tool that you can just roll on the table or pick what you like and then put your character and add the little details you want for your character for that. Those two tools, official tools you can use. And I also second, if you're really going to dive into Exandria, Tal'Dorei Reborn is probably another book you're going to want to pick up. And it's not surprising either because Eberron did this too. Keith Baker did this with, I believe it's Exploring Eberron, which expanded the lore of Eberron. Tal'Dorei Reborn does very much the same thing. It expands the lore of Exandria to give you all the little bits you need to really make a richer character for the setting. So, got to drop some money for some books, but they're going to generally be worth it. If for the player side, there is player options in there, so you can play characters with those options to help you kind of fit into the world and feel a little bit more ingrained in it. And actually, we're going to go with one more question before we head out. Wolfsbane says, how would you add Rune Knights to the setting? Maybe a faction from the Great Libraries. I just need to find the name of it, but I know there's a section in the northern areas of Exandria that's closer to Wildmount where all the lost magic is from. It's an icy area, and I don't know let me see if I can find it.
Are you talking about Isolacross?
Yeah, there it is. I would have your Rune Knight be there. Your runes are actually ancient texts and ancient words of power that you've discovered from Isocross. Maybe you already were a fighter, and then you had one adventure one time, and then you started, like whenever I believe they do this with every time you see aliens, and then in the back of your head you learn the language and you just start
Oh, yeah.
yeah, like you're possessed and you start writing all the alien glyphs. Pretty much you can do that too. You were a fighter, you had one really bad adventure, the next day you just start in the middle of the night, just start writing glyphs, and they never went away. And then you use those glyphs as words of power, and that could be all from Isocross.
Yeah, you discovered words of power like the Dragonborn in Skyrim. You
Yeah.
can't get them out of your head,
Yeah.
But Chris also brought up the Rune Child Sorcerer. Maybe you could be a version of that, but instead of like a sorcerer, you're a Rune Child fighter. You're the runic type of fighter, but manifestation of the same concept. And you would need to kind of keep your runes hidden because of what Chris described earlier, of people wanting to experiment on you or try to use you as a weapon because magic's like built into your body and maybe it can be used against your will. Who knows?
You could also go the tribal route. I mean, the Rune Knight has a lot to do with giants. There's we know in Exandria that the Goliaths in the world are a lot more tribal than anything else. So it could be something that's passed on to certain Goliaths once they reach a certain level in their hierarchy. So you could make it more of like a tribal thing. I think that would be really cool, really interesting.
Yeah, really draw up on the Goliaths and kind of make them a little bit more prominent in the world. That'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah.
I always thought it would be cool. This is totally separate, but I thought it would be cool in my own setting, like when I homebrew a world, to have Goliaths have a strange manifestation where like their scars are hereditary. So if you get a scar, your children will have the same scar. And it'd be cool to have like hereditary runes in a Goliath tribe, and different tribes have different runes. Maybe
sweet.
you go on a pilgrimage
That's a really
to
good
gain
idea.
different runes or something like that. That could be cool.
That's actually really sweet. That'd be actually really cool. And then eventually, Kind of reminds me of a little bit of Ebron, where the dragon marks bit, because there's certain build
Yeah,
lines that have the dragon
Yeah.
marks. Yeah, I think you can play upon that same idea too, and just have it distinctly in the Goliath race.
yeah, and then you could have factions that kind of gatekeep their runes or their dragon
Mhm.
marks, like in Eberron. And so any of these factions we talked about, maybe they have people who have their lore of certain runes, and you were entrusted with some of them for some reason.
That'd be sweet. All right. Hopefully, this all helps you to sort of dive into Call of the Netherdeep, Exandria, and really get you interested in possibly playing a character and help you play that character. This whole starting in March, this is kicking me off to we're really digging into this setting, and we're going to be looking at our character options from Taldor Reborn starting next week. Jordan, I believe you're joining back with me, and then Winter Wyvern's going to be joining in for part 1. And Chris, I know you're going to be joining me the rest of the month also on various other ones. So Chris might be with me for part 2, and then we're going to get into the Blood Hunter. It's probably one of the most requested classes I've seen on my channel. Be like, hey, can you look at the Blood Hunter? Can you do a build for the Blood Hunter? So this month we're doing a build for the Blood Hunter, and then I'm picking and choosing certain options from Tatar Reborn to make builds. So starting next week, you're going to see a build for one of probably my favorite subclass that came out of there. You're going to see a build for that, and then the following week, you're going to see the voted on build, which was the Blood Magic Wizard. So everybody voted on that one, wanting to see that one, and then you'll see the Blood Hunter. So yeah, so it's going to be rolling out that way. This week, what did I have? I'm going to post it in the chat. I had a build for a Tabaxi Way of the Mercy Monk character that was a Patreon request. What's going on, Eric? Eric, thank you for the 5. He said he made it, and he's catching us right on the tail end of this. Right on the tail end of this. But yeah, if you haven't checked it out, go ahead. It was a fun build to kind of it's the first monk build actually I've done on the channel. I haven't actually done a monk build at all. It's a crime. But yeah, and it was fun. It was a Patreon requested, and for those that want to request builds and get more info, you can always just go to the Patreon Dungeoneers pack for that, and you can get a custom build that will be into a video for you. All right. So before we go, we'll start for Jordan. Jordan, where can they find you?
You can find me at the Flutes Loot YouTube channel. That's like the word flute, plural, flutes, and loot, like you're looting a body, as D&D adventurers tend to do. And flutesloot.com. That's where I started out. My wife and I just write a whole bunch of articles about D&D, and now we do YouTube. And she has a lot of really cool designs on Redbubble. I definitely recommend you check those out. You'll get a smile on your face from some of those.
I agree. Her art is amazing. Definitely go check out the Redbubble and pick up some shirts and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Chris, where can they find you?
You can find me on YouTube. UndrLVLd without the E's is the simplest way to find me. We do a lot of chill stuff over there. Not as fancy as over here, but we're just there to have a good time.
Awesome. And all the links for everybody is down in the description. Please go sub and support them. They do really, really awesome work. And yeah, so next week we're really kicking off Call of the Netherdeep. It'll be the first character build. Jordan will be back with me again. And also I'll be joined by Winter Wyvern for next Sunday stream too. We're going to be covering, I believe, the first half of the character subclasses. For sure. So again, thank you guys. Check out the Tabaxi Monk character build. Oh yeah, and also you can find Chris and Eric's self promo channel all the time, like clockwork. and Fry Mini's Discord. Definitely go support Eric and Fry Minis over there too, doing awesome work. He is getting through, or I think he just got through all of the Monsters of the Multiverse stuff, and now he had some fun stuff coming in from WizKids regarding their new framework. So if you haven't checked that video out, go ahead and check them out. And then yeah, until next time, guys, you guys have a good one, and you guys take care.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks,
Yeah.
Chris.